All right. My name is Laura Langley, and I am in Little Rock, Arkansas. Today is December 12th, 2020, and I'm interviewing Allison Berryhill from Atlantic, Iowa for the oral history project titled COVID-19 Teacher Poets Writing to Bridge the Distance, which will be archived by Oklahoma State University Oral History Research Program. So hello, Allison.
Hello.
Will you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Allison Berryhill, and I live in rural Iowa. I am currently teaching high school English freshmen, and then I also run the journalism program. So I teach different levels of journalism and editing and such. What do you want to know? My kids are grown. I'm a mother of 6, and we live out here on a farm. My husband's still farming. I've been teaching in my current position for about 17 years now. Before that, I stayed home for about 14 years when my kids were little, and did freelance writing during that time, and then had taught for about 5 years before that. So I've kind of gone, I was in teaching, then out of teaching, and now have been back into it for quite a while.
What kind of writing did you do as a freelancer?
I did a lot of personal essay, and then I also did magazine articles on like parenting and education topics mostly. I did a little writing for Better Homes and Gardens, and then I was the Twins humor columnist for Twins magazine. My youngest are twins, so I did that for a while, and that was it's funny to look back on them now because I don't even remember writing them, and it's kind of a nice little, since I didn't keep a baby book.
Got a nice catalog.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, tell me how you became an educator.
And mostly because I was the third child with older siblings who were very schoolish, so I was not schoolish and was very bored by school, and I kind of rebelled against it. I kept thinking that school doesn't have to be this boring, and then when I got to college, I started really loving my English classes, and started seeing the potential for making school not that boring. So that's kind of how I got into it then, and became an English and speech teacher, and then I got my journalism certification here about 8 years ago when our principal moved. She had been the journalism teacher, and then she became the principal, so then I picked up that, and I had having worked in freelance, I had that journalism interest anyway, and so I picked that up, and now that's kind of my niche.
Yeah, that's interesting how it's evolved over time.
Yeah.
And you've spoken some about what you do as an educator. Is there anything you want to say more about the school context that you're teaching in right now?
Yeah. We have 450 kids in our school building, and that's 9 through 12. This fall, they're limiting the sizes of our classes, trying to create some distance, but we've been face-to-face learning this whole fall, and we really aren't distanced. And we also are in a very conservative community that just really were COVID deniers for, a long time. We do require masks now when you can't be distanced because, so I just tell my kids, this isn't distanced in my room, but most of them were wearing masks for me anyway when this started. I made it real clear that, well, I guess, am I jumping ahead of myself? Do you want me to talk about COVID yet?
Okay. I think go for it.
Because I was in March when everything shut down. Just a week into the shutdown, we moved my parents out of their care center in Fort Dodge and moved them into my basement. And we put them in my basement because it was one level, and then I could keep myself as protected as possible. But then my husband stayed on that top floor, so he didn't have contact with them. And then my son lived down the road, and he didn't, they'd wave at the window and that kind of stuff. But I was able to keep them pretty isolated like that. And my mother-in-law, who's 91, lives down the road. And so I was taking care of these really vulnerable people. And so I kept myself as protected as I possibly could. So then when I went back into school, I made that clear to my students early on. My parents had gone back up to the care center because I didn't feel like I could keep myself safe enough to, once I was back in the classroom. But I am still in contact with my mother-in-law. And so I let them know that I took it very seriously and created a little cage for myself at the front of the room, which is crazy because I was a teacher who I only had couches in my room. I didn't even have any desks. It was my room was always like this. And now this year I'm like cordoned off at the front of the room, and I spray my desks between each class. And so, I mean, it's, I don't know, that part's for me.
I've never sat so much.
Yes. Yeah. It's like,
other than being a student, I guess.
And you have a hybrid, so you get half your kids on one day and half on the other.
We are on block, so I see them every other, but we're blended. And so it's kind of, some classes are 50-50, some I have one in class and the rest are at home. It really just depends on the family's choice. But yeah, I'm stuck to a chair because I have to be on camera and, teaching students.
Yeah, and I have kids who Zoom in to my classroom, some who chose remote learning from the beginning of the year, some who are in and out for quarantine. And then when we brought our mask mandate in, I had 3 students whose families decided to pull them to remote learning rather than ask them to wear a mask. So we've had those students too. But it does mean that I'm not doing a good job with it. It's I feel like if I was totally online, I feel like I could do it. And I feel like if I'm totally in the classroom, I can do it. But where I'm failing my online kids. I am failing them, meaning I'm not giving them Fs. I'm like not doing them justice because, like you said, you're sitting down in front of them. Mine is set up so a lot of the time they see the back of my head so they can see their classmates, and I forget about them, and they turn off their cameras. So then I really forget about them. And I mean, it's just. No,
I don't have any camera, or I don't see any faces either. So it's very much out of sight, out of mind, unfortunately.
Yeah. Especially when you've got the real faces in front of you, it makes it very, very hard. So
definitely. When did the mask? So you didn't start the school year with required masks.
Nope. And we had two of our 3 members on the school board, or 2 of our 5, who were in favor of masks, but the other 3 wouldn't do it. And then it was when our numbers, I don't know if you guys are in Iowa, we keep monitoring the positivity rate of the tests, and that determines where you're at. And our schools could ask to go to virtual learning if we were above 15% online, and if we also have 10% absentee. And I mean, there's all these numbers that you have to meet. Our governor was very weak in sensing what this was all about, and Iowa's really feeling it right now. We are in a bad place. But when our school district went above 15%, I mean, and then we went above 20, and that's when they finally got the mask mandate in, because essentially they were doing it at that point to, they were afraid we weren't going to even be able to keep our school open. So it was like the better of, lesser of 2 evils from their perspective, I think. But
sure. Has that helped the positivity rate go down?
Well, our positivity rate has dropped a little bit, but I don't know. We've had almost 1,000 cases in our county, and we've had 36 deaths, which is pretty high. That's or 38. I think it's at 3.8% of those who have become ill have died. And I've lost one of my students' grandfathers just died. We had neighbors, husband and wife, who died. I mean, I know all kinds of people who have died. Yeah. There's one of my peers who's, I mean, I'm 60, she might be 62, is intubated in Omaha right now. It's looking really dire. So we've had just a lot of.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. It sounds like a very similar story to what's happening here in Arkansas. So.
Well, most of this has been since September. You know what I mean? We were the ones who just had nothing up here in Iowa. And I think that there was that complacency. I think our governor thought that we were somehow immune. I don't know. So,
yeah, the smaller communities, I think give us a false sense of what's really going on until it enters the community and then it spreads like wildfire. This is kind of backtracking a little bit. But going back to the spring of 2020, do you remember learning that teachers or that schools would be moving to remote learning and teaching?
I do. That Sunday was the day that Friday was the 13th, 14th was, so it was the 15th of March. And I was planning to see the school musical that day. And they had it Friday night, Saturday night, and it was Sunday at noon. And all of a sudden they canceled that. They did actually perform it, but they performed it, just recorded it. They didn't have any audience. And that night, then the governor made the announcement. And I mean, it was like the ultimate snow day, like, whoa, where'd this come from? Kind of thing. I think we were all really, surprised. And then, those first couple of days, there was so much uncertainty. Nobody knew anything. And I don't think it was very long before they said that we could not come. Like they gave us like a little window of time to come in to the school and get some things if we needed them. And then they just, shut down the building and we weren't even allowed to go into the building. And we were told to let kids finish up the work. That it was actually like at the end of a quarter, I think. But they were allowed to finish up their work, but we weren't supposed to assign anything new. And then we weren't supposed to grade anything. And I mean, it was just like every day you were getting some kind of different information. It was really chaotic. Then we were told, to offer extended learning for those who wanted it. And then my English department, there are 4 of us. We decided to hold a Zoom. We set it for a half hour, and then at the end of the half hour, we said we'll hang out here for another 15 minutes if anybody wants to stay. And somebody always stayed. So, but we had a blast. It was the 4 of us. We got to like team teach, and by the end of our school year, I think we only had about 12 to 14 regulars. So our ratio of teachers was ridiculous, but we had a really good time. It was the strangest little interlude for that group of students. They were across all 4 grades, and when we might not have had any seniors. The seniors really checked out. But we just really simplified things. Every day, one of us, when we rotated it, Monday we would read and analyze a poem. Tuesday, we wrote poetry. Wednesday, we did a grammar thing. Thursday was discussion, and Friday, I can't even remember. Anyway, but we did something, and we just kind of kept that really simple. A little simple lesson, a lot of conversation, and those kids all had their cameras on.
Yeah,
but they also had 4 teachers there with their cameras on with them too. And it was a funny little community, but it was a little unusual, a little chapter of my teaching, so different.
Lovely, like something the teachers and the students will probably remember for a long time too.
And it really was it was more like a learning community. It really, even though, there were the teachers, like if I was doing the lesson, my other 3 teachers were participating as students. So we were, that was actually kind of nice, but it was very strange.
Yeah, it sounds very valuable.
Then at the end of that semester, our kids were told, well, basically, you either could take the grade you had at the third quarter, or you could take a pass fail, whichever would hurt your grade point the least. Mm-hmm. So if you had a 3-point grade point average and you were getting a C, you could just take the class as a pass and it would just not affect your grade point. So, I mean, they really bent over backwards to try to not punish students with an inability to raise their grade at that point.
Right. Well, and as you know, the school closures kind of coincided with the National Poetry Month, and you, along with other educators, participating in writing a poem a day. Can you talk about writing poetry during a pandemic, what that was like for you?
Yes, I had been participating in the monthly 5-day poetry writing challenge for, I don't know, 8 months or so. I hadn't done the April one a year ago that I think got it all started. And I always look forward to that and enjoyed that. And I also, on Wednesday of that very first week, I decided that I was going to blog through whatever this was. I thought I have no idea what this is. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I think I should pay attention. And so, I've had a blog for years, but I'm kind of hit and miss on it, you know. And I just decided I was going to try to blog every day, or just about every day. Well, I decided that on Wednesday, and then on Friday was when my siblings called and said, "Would you move our parents into your basement?" And then suddenly I had that huge life change thing. Also because my mother and I have had a real fractious relationship all growing up, but now she's becoming demented, and it was a way to reconnect and get to know each other it was just a gift. I mean, I never in my adult life would have done that if it hadn't been for COVID, because they were living up in Fort Dodge, and I'd see them once every couple of months. I'd come up and say hello and try to be kind of polite, but we weren't very close. And then they lived with me, and my mother, in her increasing dementia, has just become so sweet and no longer judgmental, and is struggling as she recognizes she's losing her memory. And it was just very good for us. And in fact, recently I was talking with her, and it's hard now because now she's back in Fort Dodge. She can come on to Zoom, but it's just not the same as sitting down they had a little table, and we would, I would always bring a poem down to read, and we would talk about, both my parents love poetry, and we would do that in the morning. It was one of our little routines. But I was talking to my mom here recently, and I was saying, I've just been remembering so many of the nice things we did while you were here. They liked to go out in my yard and fly kites and blow bubbles, and we did some things like that. And she said, "Oh, Allie, that was one of the happiest times of my life." And I thought, probably not. I mean, really, you're 90 years old. It's in the pandemic. You can't see anybody. You no longer have your physical capabilities. But for her to say that, she was thinking of it as being such a joyful time. And so I thought, it meant a lot to me that she looks at that interlude so fondly, because I did too. They were here about 4.5 months.
Oh, yeah, that's so fortunate for both of you.
You're talking about poetry. Okay, and what I'm trying to say is that I was blogging at the same time I was writing poetry. So I was writing prose every day, and then in April, I was writing the poem, and I like to write my poetry at night. So they would post the prompt, and then in the evening is when I would sit down and write my poem. And I love the freedom that participating in a challenge gives you, because you think, oh, well, I didn't like that poem, but I get to check that off my list. I did it, and where if you don't have something like that, you might think, oh, well, this isn't good enough, or I don't want to share this or anything like that. It's like, all I have to do is get something down there on the page. And so that somehow gives me a freedom. I expect less of myself, and that's freeing when you're a poet, because if you are just judging yourself the whole time, you can't write anything at all. So,
Absolutely.
and I do love that poetry community. You feel like you recognize names and you see people returning to themes. And so that was a very, it was a very positive thing to be writing poetry in April with a group of educators. And sometimes, our comments to each other is a different layer of the communication. I mean, the poems are there, but then we're talking to each other too. So that was really, really good.
Nice. I'd love to hear something that you wrote during those early days.
I pulled up what I wrote on the first day of April, which was the first day. We actually had written our March days right there at the beginning of COVID too, but this was the first of the 30-day April. And the prompt was to think of our personal credo and what that might be and how we might express that in a poem. So I titled this From My Open Hand. I give you the benefit of the doubt, quick and generous laughter, rose tint on that glass tilted toward the Iowa sky. A job that suits your skills and leaves soft petals as your footprints. I give you gravel to run on, a new skill to learn, evidence of synergy, a Broadway musical, a complex interstate cloverleaf, a four-leaf clover, the First Amendment. I give you a chance to be kind. Take it. A chance to forget that slight. Take it. A chance to step up. Take it. A poem to write. Write it. So that was that. I love the variety of prompts we get. This morning when I was leafing back through those poems we wrote in April, and just the wide range of prompts. I use a lot of these prompts and mentor texts in my own classroom. I've been that's one of the changes that I think has been impacted by COVID is I am having my students do much more poetry writing. I feel like I need to tend their souls more than I maybe was doing in a traditional year. And so my freshmen have been writing poetry almost every week. And I almost always take from the Verse Love because it's so good. We've got these excellent mentor texts. Then I can show them the original mentor text. I can show them what I did with that mentor text. And I like to do that on a page. Like I'll do a table. And so you see the first one, then you see mine, and then it's blank where they can write theirs. And when I asked them to tell me what about my poem resonated with them and what words and lines did they feel connected to, I can guide that kind of questioning so that then when we read their poems, if they choose to share their poems, they all chime in with those kinds of things because I've asked for those kinds of things. So just the form of what writing verse love poetry with teachers allows me to do authentically as a poem sharer with my students, I think has been good.
Yeah, I agree. Very much the same. Let's see. So COVID-19 has impacted states and schools in different ways. How did your state or school respond? And how did those policies impact you as an educator?
I've kind of alluded to the fact that our state was slow and in denial. I just want to put this in here because I think it's a piece of what I experienced. My brother-in-law was a nurse in a care center in Cedar Rapids early. Well, he was. And he got COVID early. He got it in April and he was very sick. He was intubated. We really didn't know from day to day if he was going to make it. He actually ended up getting the antibody serum. And that is when he made his, recovered. He's deaf now in one ear and one of his fingers he can't bend down. But I think other than that, he's pretty much recovered. But that was because it was so personal, I felt like I was like, ah, and everybody around me was like, so I think that impacted, me a little bit. Our school did things like, in the summer, our school decided to host a prom and a face-to-face graduation. And I thought that was not a good decision. I didn't go to anything like that. I mean, I'm trying to think how that impacted my teaching. I have had to pull back from things I would normally do because I'm making the decisions for me rather than letting the school make the decisions, for me. We lost our absolutely fabulous chemistry teacher because she said it's not safe. You guys don't have safe structures in place, and I don't want to come back. Now, she did get a job in Des Moines that has much tighter. I think she's teaching all virtually right now, but they have responded much more, I would say, responsibly than I feel we have. So how did that impact my teaching? I think that some of what we did in the spring with that simplified approach has filtered into my teaching this year. I actually think I'm doing some of the best teaching to my face-to-face kids, not my poor kids online this year, that I have in a long time, because I am I'm giving like hardly any homework. I'm just like, you know what? Our main job is just to get through this and take care of one another and be present with each other while we're here. And I think my teaching behavior tended to be more rushed and more never have a moment of downtime. We're just always got something going next. And I just felt like I needed to recalibrate that, because I don't know what all kids are dealing with. And I'm trying very hard to be gentle with myself. Why would I not want to extend that to my students as well? And I mean, demanding less of myself. And I don't think we're learning any less. We might be learning different things, but we're having a meaningful year together. So.
Well, I see that, like, your generosity in that poem that you've already shared. Did you see how these issues impacted your poetry writing during the month of April or since then?
When I look back at my poems, a lot of them, they don't seem overtly related to COVID. And yet, like, I chose one about running, and that's in COVID, running became one of my structures of my day. And that was really nice. I hadn't run so much for several years. So so then I wrote about running. And then I tried to be outside and be very aware of things. And one time I found a little dog tooth. So then I wrote about that dog tooth. And so these are the kinds of things that, while not directly COVID related, I was trying very hard to pay attention. And that is, that's poetic thinking.
Sorry, my dog just walked in. And
oh, nice. I don't know if you saw my husband wander past here, but
he's just very sniffly. So he actually lost a couple dog teeth recently. So.
Oh, is he a puppy or is he older?
No, he's an older dog. It was time for them to go.
Well, my parents had their old dog living in the basement with them. And then we have another old dog upstairs, but it was my son's puppy who had lost a tooth that I found. I'm sure it was, just a little puppy tooth.
Well, would you like to share your poem on running or another poem?
Oh yeah, I could do. Yeah, let me. I'll tell you what. How about if I share the poem about the dog, the puppy's tooth, and then I can share the running one. Okay, good. So, and this one was written April 21st, and it was a prompt by Sarah, and she said Donovan, and she said that the next day was going to be Earth Day, so she wanted us to write a poem related to the Earth, and she suggested the form OOHRP, I think is how you pronounce it, that included 3 rhyming couplets and a quatrain, and her prompting question was, "What has the Earth given you?" And I had, as I looked at that prompt and I thought about finding that dog tooth that day, is what I decided to write about. And in this form, you have couplets, but then the last line combines 3 of the lines that you had heard earlier. So it's kind of an entwined poem, which I think are really, I love playing with poems with rhyme and form because it makes me push my words and thoughts back against each other. So, so this is, I don't think I have a title. I found upon the step a puppy's tooth. I tell the truth. Small and clean and white as milk, smooth as silk. A treasure cradled in my palm, a gift of calm. Who knew a tooth as midday balm? A small white star come down to earth, a tiny sigh, a tiny mirth. I tell the truth, smooth as silk, a gift of calm. That was my little treasure of finding a tooth that made me smile. And I
love that.
Thank you.
It reminds me of when you find like a robin's egg on the ground.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Those little moments where you just pause to appreciate.
So nice. Oh yeah, the line about the tiny star is what.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And did you want to share a second?
Yeah,
now?
I'll go ahead and share my one about running now, and then as when we close, I'll share that last one. So,
okay.
So this one I wrote on April 18th, and our prompt was to look at something from 2 sides, and the teacher that day, and I don't know who to give credit to, suggested that we use Joni Mitchell's song Both Sides Now. So I used her rhythm and rhyme scheme to examine 2 sides of running. So this is called Running. Pain and drain of energy and weight of body's lethargy, the headwinds pounding westerly. I've looked at runs that way. I've also run to hope and heal, to know the solace that is real, and afterwards endorphins feel. I welcome runs today. I've looked at running's cons and pros, its ups and downs, its highs and lows. The motivation comes and goes, a twin-edged path this runner knows. But I thought that was a fun prompt to get to like try to look at something from 2 different sides, and then using Joni's rhythm and rhyme was kind of a fun way to play with that.
Yeah, I love your poem. That's, again, I can very much relate to that as someone who runs off and on.
Thank you. Yes, I love it. You know, I never get done with a run and think, oh, I wish I hadn't run. Exactly. But I say, yeah, I still can't get myself out there some days.
Right. Or during it, you're.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Let's see. So some states continued with distance learning through the end of the school year in 2020, which it sounds like yours did. Was there anything memorable about the end of the school year or how it wrapped up?
The most memorable thing for me was that working with my colleagues. And you know what? Teachers do not have time to work with each other like that. And we so enjoyed each other's strengths and differences. We each brought something there, but we have 4 very different teaching styles. And it shows me again how much better our teaching would be if we actually had time to collaborate like that. So that's a piece that I bring out of last spring. We had I had classes, like my journalism classes, yearbook especially. My kids just fell off. They did not finish the yearbook. They were just gone. And I decided not to fight that. Part of me was kind of disappointed. You think, come on, kids, can't you finish your yearbook spread? But I also, like I said, I don't know what they were dealing with. And I also told myself that I was not going to finish that yearbook by myself in the summer, which I've always finished the yearbook in the summer if it's not done. You know, I mean, you usually have some kids come in and help you, but we finish it up. And I just thought, no, we'll finish it in the fall when I have kids back again who can finish it. And so that's what we did. And it was the best decision ever. I had the best summer of my life. How can I say COVID was the best summer of my life? I wasn't doing the yearbook. But that was a good choice. And I think that is, you know, that some of that drawing the line kind of thing. And when I saw how quickly some kids were just out of there, it made me rethink my self-importance. You know, maybe what I thought was so all-powered essential wasn't. And that probably affects my my tone a little bit in the classroom, but it also has. I have pretty student-directed classrooms to begin with, because like the newspaper, that they're choosing the stories and they're doing the editing and they're putting it out there, and I'm kind of just trying to stay out of their way. And same with yearbook and same with the broadcasting and things like that. But I would say that it's pushed me to an even bigger level of that. Like, I'm not going to make this bigger than it needs to be. You students, you decide what you're putting into this, rather than me whipping it up into a froth that's bigger than needed to be. So I think that has impacted, you know, that watching that happen at the end of the year made me think, you know, it's a little bit like when you are writing comments on students' paper and you think this really, really matters, and then you hand the paper and you see them toss it in the bin and you think, oh, maybe everything I had to say wasn't all that. And I had a little sense of that when kids had the opportunity to come and learn and didn't do it. So that's kind of depressing.
Yeah. But like you said, we don't know what all's going on in their lives.
Right. And it's not healthy for me to think it's because they hate me or hate English or anything like that. So
yeah, it's definitely not that. Will the yearbook look different this year?
Oh, yes. So last year's yearbook that we finished this fall just kind of came back, and we had I gotta show it to you. We had oh my, I bet we finished half of it this fall. So here's our yearbook. We make a beautiful yearbook. I really like it. But we had to do a ton of stuff, like we filled in with like stories from our newspapers, because we didn't have any spring sports. We didn't then for our spring sports, we did things like we had the coaches write letters to the teams that they would have had, but they didn't have because there was no, you know, we got pictures that kids submitted from things that, you know, we didn't take those pictures. They didn't have a soccer season. And then you had the coaches letter to the team talking about what he had wished for them that never happened. So we did a bunch of crazy stuff like that, but it's strange. But now our book we're working on this year, we're starting to turn in spreads, and it's crazy because all of these pictures, these kids are masked. You know, it's really gonna be something to look back on this.
Definitely. Yeah. All of our emails from our teacher who oversees the yearbook is like, please, like, she always asks us to identify students, but she's like, this year, like, I will not be able to figure out who the kids are. You have to tell me who's in the picture.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's so.
As a teacher, there are students in my classroom that once in a while, when they remove their mask, to take a sip of water, and I'm like, that's what you look like.
I've had that feeling too, when I've seen kids who always wear their mask, and then, you think, no.
It is, but yeah, that's amazing that your students and the school will have those kind of time capsules to look back on. I mean, even those letters from the coaches, I think, must be really special for students to read and look back on.
And I mean, it does address the fact that everything just came to a screeching halt, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll reflect the times well. And you've talked a bit about what the current state of COVID is in your state and local schools, and what teaching is like for you now. I guess, if there's anything you'd like to add to that, or if writing has factored into the last few months in a new way.
It definitely has. I think my blogging, maybe even more so than the poetry writing, just because I'm doing more of it. You know, it's almost daily. And I also saw myself working. I mean, I suddenly had this story of my brother-in-law's illness, and my story of my parents trying to move in when my mother would wake up and not know where she was at. And then as our time went on and we got to know each other again, there was a whole story there. And then when I went back to school, I'm often writing about what school is like right now with this. So it's that I know, for me, the most valuable thing about writing regularly is that it makes me pay attention, because and I learned that when I was freelancing, that you're always watching for something that you're going to be writing about. And that's just a great way to live, whether you're writing or even sharing your stuff or not. Just paying attention is it. And it's strange because I'm trying to write about COVID and we're on day 270 or some ridiculous thing. How can you possibly have 270 days worth of writing about COVID in you? And so it's not always about COVID, but that was my intent, to say, what is this experience like? And I had my first grandchild in July, but my son lives in New Zealand. And so I originally was going to be spending 2 weeks in New Zealand with the new baby. And of course that didn't happen. And now he's 5 months old today, and I'll be lucky if I can see him by the time he's a year. So that's been another piece of my COVID experience. And the writing gives me permission to look at something as small as a dog's tooth. You know, otherwise you think this is another boring day, just like the other boring days I had. And it's kind of funny because I keep a 5-year diary that there's just a little piece. And sometimes I can't even think of how I'm going to fill that up. But I go to my blog and I can write a whole blog, because I give myself, like, it's nothing happened today that's worth writing in the 5-year diary. But I did have a feeling today about something that I can explore in my blog. Mm-hmm. So I think that writing has been absolutely a central piece for me during this time. And I'm really glad I've done it, because it gave me structure to my day, and I needed that. And it gave me, permission to think about tiny things. And so now, do you write poetry? Do you write poetry regularly, or just during these kinds of things, or what do you do?
Yeah, just during, and I actually started writing with this community in April. My mom had mentioned it, and I actually originally thought, I'll write, but I'm not going to post anything. And then that first day, though, I wrote and felt good about it and read everyone's poetry and the comments. And I was like, well, I have to. So then I just fell in love with it. It became something, especially early or early-ish relatively in COVID. It was like the only regular thing I could look forward to with people.
Yeah, it really was, wasn't it? I mean, it was a real community kind of a thing when all of our other community had just vanished.
Exactly. And I'm trying to figure out how to Zoom with friends that doesn't feel right. And, I mean, by the end of April, I'm talking to my husband at night, like reading, like, oh, Allison said this about my poem. He's like, oh, is that the one who like,
to get to know the whole cast?
Yeah. So that was so nice. But I wish I had thought so often, and I kept a pretty, not strict, but regular diary for the first, I think, at least 70 something days, because I was numbering them too. And, as it does, summer break came and I was working still, but I kind of, and I wish I had kept up with it, but felt like without the daily prompts and without, if I didn't feel called to the notebook, I just didn't visit it. And it, it's everything. It's a habit. And once you don't feed it.
Have you written your poem today for Verse Lab?
No, I've been thinking about it.
Okay.
I was in the morning and then.
Oh, that's a good way to do it. And you kind of mull it through the day and
But, you asked, I just was looking for books of poetry on my shelves, and most of the ones I have are at school. So I think I might look at an album and use song titles instead. But,
actually, I haven't read the prompt yet, so but I'm guessing now that we're going to do something with poem titles.
Yeah, you take poem titles and string them together into a poem. So, which is something I have about, kind of like the book spine.
Yes.
Poetry, but with poetry titles. So, let's see. Well, we've been talking for almost an hour. And is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to add? Or, of course, if you want to read your last poem, but if you want to add anything before that?
To think. I have nudged many of my teacher friends, even teacher friends who I know do some writing, and writing of poetry, to join us in the monthly Verse Love or the April 30-day. And some will dabble, or I've even had some who will do the poem and send it directly to me, but not put it out there. I wish, I come from a writing process, Iowa writing project mindset of the truly valuing writing as a way to improve my teaching, because I have to be practicing what I'm asking kids to do. And I have to know those feelings and those frustrations and that experience if I'm going to be authentically asking them to write too. So I wish that more people would do it. Even if they don't love it like I do, I think that they would I think it would improve their sense of what they're asking kids to do. And improve their sense of what's helpful. There was a really nice Peter Elbow quote that I just actually saw on Ethical ELA today when I was glancing through there, and it was something about the only thing that helps a writer is to see a movie of the mind of the reader. Said I brutalized that, but the idea is what we really need is for somebody to read our stuff and say, this is what I saw, this is what I experienced. We don't need them to say, well, if you had done this, you know. So I think the more you spend time with people who are sharing themselves to be heard, and the more you practice listening to that, the better you can respond to students writing as well. That this is what I'm hearing, and this is what I'm experiencing as I read your writing. And I think that is probably the most helpful growth food we can give to young writers.
Well, and as you said earlier, that, I mean, now is a time where adults need a lot of care, but I mean, of course, our students do too. And to give them those opportunities to write poetry and read other poetry is certainly help for the soul, and as much as them as writers too. So,
I do think it's interesting that my students have been so receptive to doing it. I just really have not had maybe only a couple who seem at times to be like, I don't know if I can get a poem out kind of thing. But for the most part, they've really risen to the kind of atmosphere that's built off of the verse love model. Mm-hmm. So I think there's that. And like I said, especially in this time of COVID, where anything we can do to help soften each other's days is of value.
I'm curious, do you have them post their poetry similarly to the verse love?
They have they have blogs, and they have free reign as to what they put in their blogs. And then I ask them to respond to 5 blogs. And we talk about and look at the kinds of comments that help us feel like we were really heard, kind of thing. But they don't have to. And then, but I also then they post them on the blog. But then I also will give kids a chance to share them with the class. We pull it up on the big screen, and I ask them if they want to read it, or I'll read it for them. And we share that way. And you know, I don't know if I have a single student who hasn't shared at least one poem. They're pretty. You kind of want to, like you say, you wrote that first poem and you think, I'd like to maybe hear what people think of this. And we really do have a community that is, we are only saying what's working here in this poem. So it's a safe way to put your work out there.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like with students, poetry is one of the best ways to get to find or reach the ones who maybe don't think of themselves as writers. Poetry is for some reason so accessible, and they get excited and do come around the idea of sharing in a way that I'm always a little reluctant to even suggest it, because I don't want to put them on the spot, but then they always rise to the occasion. And
yeah. And I do find, like, if I email somebody behind the scenes and say, you know, may I share your poem in class today? I loved this line, or something like that. That's really hard for them to say no to. Yeah. So, but we have. Can I go ahead and share my last poem and let you wind up and get about your Saturday? I really do enjoy writing sonnets. That's kind of a form that I've always enjoyed playing with. Like I told you that I kind of like structured poems sometimes. And our final day of Verse Love, we were invited to look back through what we had written and whatever. So it was kind of a reflective prompt that day. And so I decided to write a sonnet to the 30 days of Verse Love. And that's what I did. Unfortunately, I think this reads better on paper than out loud, because my last 2 lines, my couplet at the end, line 13 ends in the words I am, like I am. Mm-hmm. And then the very last line ends in the word I am, like the I am foot of a poem. So when I read it out loud, it's just going to sound like I am, but there's that play there. So I feel like I have to say that to make it make sense. So, okay. Sonnet to Verse Love. From April 1 to 30, close of day, I wrote a verse according to the plan. Just do the verb to be the noun, they say. I think I can. The little engine could, and so could I. With fuel of gentle comments for my words, my willingness to share was magnified. I chugged ahead because my thoughts were heard. How can I recreate what happened here? How can this vision turn into a plan? How can I help my students face their fear? My little engine chugs. I think I can. I think. Therefore, I am. This little engine celebrates I am. So, my little chug to my verse love community, but it was kind of fun to play with.
Yeah, that's a wonderful poem to end on too. Thank you so much for your time.
I've really enjoyed visiting with you. This is going to be so much fun now to read your poetry when I have a face to put to it. And
I know, I was going to say the same thing. I've had a thumbnail of who you are. So, 9 months or 8 months, but now I know.
Yeah.
I have a face and a voice too. So
really good. Thank you so much. And now I get to enjoy visiting with your mom.
Yeah, enjoy. I was going to say, I think you might find that she and her mother's relationship is somewhat similar to what you were experiencing with yours.
Yeah. Is your grandmother still living?
No, she passed away not right before, but August of 2019. And she was in a home. So we talk about quite a bit how we feel grateful that she didn't have to live through what it would have been like to be alone.
And my parents now are they're isolated in their room, but they do have each other, which is both a blessing and a curse because, small space. And my mother, repeats a lot of the same things in questions and things. And so that's hard, but they also say that they're very grateful that most of their friends are in a room by themselves.
Interesting.
So they at least have each other. So.
Yeah.
Well, will you get outside to run this afternoon?
Probably walk, but yes.
Okay. Nice.
Our dog doesn't like to run. Well, in small spurts.
We have snow here today. It's kind of a bit of a storm came in, but anyway.
That sounds lovely to walk through anyway. Yeah, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Enjoy your Saturday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.